Taste.
The funeral was quiet, controlled, the kind of service where every flower arrangement had been pre-approved and every tear had been rehearsed. Thomas Caldwell had been dead for 3 days, and his family was already performing grief like it was a board meeting. Ellen Caldwell sat in the front pew, Thomas's wife of 31 years, hands folded, expression sealed shut. Behind her, 2 sons in tailored suits checked their watches. The pastor was mid-sentence when the rear doors opened. No one expected that. A stranger walked in, a woman, maybe 60, wearing a plain gray coat that didn't belong in a room like this. No flowers, no card. She found a seat alone in the back and said nothing. But Thomas's eldest son, David, saw her first, and he went completely white. Not grief, not surprise, fear. The whispers started before she even sat down. Ellen Caldwell didn't turn around, but her spine straightened, just barely, the way a person moves when they're pretending they haven't noticed something that terrifies them. David leaned toward his younger brother, Marcus, and said something behind his hand. Marcus looked back at the woman, then quickly looked away. The pastor kept speaking, something about legacy, something about a life well lived. Nobody was listening anymore. The stranger sat perfectly still in the back pew, hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed on the closed casket at the front of the room. She hadn't picked up a program, hadn't acknowledged a single person, but she was studying that casket like she had unfinished business with the man inside it. A woman beside Ellen leaned over and whispered, "Do you know her?" Ellen's jaw tightened. "No," she said, "I don't." But her hands, those perfectly folded, perfectly rehearsed hands, had started to shake. Somewhere in the back, the stranger slowly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, and set it on her knee. "When you're ready." Thomas Caldwell had built his fortune the quiet way. No press releases, no magazine covers, just a property company worth close to $200 million that most people in Hartford had never heard of. That was intentional. But why? Ellen had asked that question exactly once, early in their marriage. Thomas had smiled and said, "Quiet money lasts longer." She never asked again. What she couldn't explain was the locked drawer in his home office, the one he carried the only key to, the one that, 3 days after his death, David had forced open with a letter opener. It was empty. Someone had cleared it out before the family even knew he was gone. The hospice nurse reported that a woman had visited Thomas in his final 48 hours. Soft-spoken, gray coat, signed in as a family friend. Nobody had thought to question it then. They were questioning it now, because Ellen had managed Thomas's calendar for 31 years, screened his calls, organized his travel, and she had never once heard the name Carol Ann Reeves. Not once. Which meant Thomas hadn't just kept a secret. He had maintained one, carefully, deliberately, for their entire marriage. David couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, right in the middle of the eulogy, and walked to the back of the room. Heads turned. Ellen didn't move. The pastor slowed but kept speaking, the way professionals do when a room starts unraveling. David reached the back pew and crouched down beside the stranger. "I'm going to need you to leave," he said. Quiet, controlled. The voice of a man used to making problems disappear. The woman didn't flinch. She turned and looked at him, really looked at him, and something crossed her face, not anger, not fear, something that looked almost like recognition. "You have your father's eyes," she said softly. David's expression cracked. "I don't know who you are," he whispered, "but this is a private service, and you were not invited." The woman glanced down at the envelope on her knee, then back at David. "Thomas invited me," she said. 30 years ago." She paused. "He just never told you why?" David's hand gripped the pew so hard his knuckles went white. In the front row, Ellen had finally turned around. Witness reaction. The pastor stopped speaking, not because anyone told him to, because David Caldwell had just crouched beside a stranger at his father's funeral, and the entire room had stopped pretending not to watch. Patricia Howe, Thomas's personal attorney of 20 years, sat 3 rows back with her hands completely still in her lap. She had reviewed Thomas's will 48 hours ago. Every asset, every clause, every beneficiary. There was no Carol Ann Reeves anywhere in that document. So why did this woman look like she had every right to be here? Ellen's 2 sisters exchanged a look that had 30 years of quiet suspicion behind it. The older one, Diane, had never trusted Thomas, had said so once at Thanksgiving in 2009 and never been forgiven for it. She wasn't surprised right now. That was the most disturbing thing about her expression. A colleague of David's near the aisle leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered something. The woman shook her head slowly. Nobody left. Nobody looked away. And then Ellen stood up. She walked up the aisle with the controlled stillness of someone who had been preparing for a moment like this, without ever knowing what that moment would look like. She stopped in front of Carol Ann. The 2 women looked at each other, and Carol Ann's expression did something nobody expected. She softened, like she felt sorry for Ellen. "Who are you?" Ellen asked. Carol's eyes drifted to the casket, then back. "Someone Thomas never stopped loving," she said. "But not," she added quietly, "the way you're thinking." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ellen Caldwell had ever heard. Then she laughed, not warmly, a short, sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Get her out," she said to David. Calm, almost bored, like she was asking him to remove a piece of furniture. But the woman was already opening the envelope. "My name is Carol Ann Reeves," she said. "I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio. Population 800. Thomas grew up 2 streets over." She removed a photograph from the envelope and held it up. Thomas. Young. Maybe 22. Standing in front of a farmhouse with his arm around a woman who was unmistakably Carol Ann, laughing, summer light, completely unguarded in a way nobody in this room had ever seen Thomas Caldwell be. "We were together for 4 years, Carol said, "before he moved to Hartford, before the company, before all of this." Ellen's attorney took 1 step forward. Carol reached back into the envelope. "There's something else," she said quietly. She produced a second document, official-looking, folded in thirds. David snatched it before anyone could stop him. His face collapsed. "Dad," he whispered, "what did you do?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ellen Caldwell had ever heard. Then she laughed, not warmly, a short, sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Get her out," she said to David. Calm, almost bored, like she was asking him to remove a piece of furniture. But the woman was already opening the envelope. "My name is Carol Ann Reeves," she said. "I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio. Population 800. Thomas grew up 2 streets over." She removed a photograph from the envelope and held it up. Thomas. Young. Maybe 22. Standing in front of a farmhouse with his arm around a woman who was unmistakably Carol Ann, laughing, summer light, completely unguarded in a way nobody in this room had ever seen Thomas Caldwell be. "We were together for 4 years, Carol said, "before he moved to Hartford, before the company, before all of this." Ellen's attorney took 1 step forward. Carol reached back into the envelope. "There's something else," she said quietly. She produced a second document, official-looking, folded in thirds. David snatched it before anyone could stop him. His face collapsed. "Dad," he whispered, "what did you do?" David's hands were shaking now. He read the document twice, then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. "This can't be real," he said. Carol Ann looked at him with an expression that wasn't triumph, wasn't anger, just the quiet exhaustion of a woman who had carried something heavy for a very long time. "It's real," she said. Thomas had it drawn up in 1993, notarized, filed with an attorney in Millbrook. Ellen snatched the document from David's hands. Her eyes moved across the page. Once. The color drained from her face completely. It was a deed, a property deed for a house in Millbrook, Ohio, transferred into the name of a child. James Thomas Reeves, born November 4th, 1991. The room understood before anyone said it out loud. Thomas Caldwell had a son, a third son, hidden, provided for quietly in a town no one in Hartford had ever thought to look. Ellen turned to Carol Ann and opened her mouth. But Carol wasn't looking at Ellen anymore. She was looking at the door. Because it had just opened again. Nobody moved for a long time. Then Patricia Howe opened her briefcase. "There's something else," she said. Her voice was careful, measured. The voice of a woman who had been sitting on information and had just decided the time for sitting was over. Every head turned. "Thomas contacted me 6 weeks ago," she said. "Before the diagnosis went public, he made an amendment to the estate." David stared at her. "You didn't tell us." "I was instructed not to." Ellen's hands gripped the pew in front of her. "What amendment?" she asked. Patricia removed a document and set it on the pew beside her, unhurried, deliberate. "He left the Millbrook property to James outright, no contest clause, no conditions." She paused. "He also left him something else." Marcus had come back inside without anyone noticing. He was standing near the rear doors, arms crossed, face unreadable. "What else?" David said. "Letters," Patricia said. 31 of them, one for every year, held in a sealed archive at my office. She looked at James. "He wanted you to have them when you were ready." James hadn't moved. The room waited for him to react, to break, to demand something, to fill the silence with anger or grief or accusation. He didn't. He looked at Ellen instead. "I didn't come here to take anything from your family," he said. "I grew up fine. My mother made sure of that." He glanced at Carol Ann. "I came because she asked me to, because she said I'd regret it if I didn't." Ellen looked at Carol Ann for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them, the kind of understanding that doesn't require explanation and couldn't survive one. "He called James every birthday," Carol said softly. "He never missed one. Not one. In 31 years. David made a sound like the air had left the room. Because Thomas Caldwell had missed David's last 3 birthdays. Business trips, conference calls, things that couldn't wait. James reached into his coat and placed the folded letter on top of the casket, the one Thomas had never sent. Then he buttoned his coat quietly and turned toward the door. "He was a complicated man," James said. He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it like someone who had made peace with something that had taken a very long time to make peace with. He walked out. The October light came through the door for just a moment, pale and indifferent, and then it closed behind him, and the Caldwell family sat in the wreckage of the man they thought they knew, quietly, together, for the first time in years.